Story came out this weekend. The Navy is extending the length of their boot camp. And I know what you're probably thinking, that's awesome. Let's find out. Let's get tougher. Oh, no. Read the screen. They're extending the length of their boot camp for more wokeism crap. I'll tell you what. Let's pause right there. Pause right there. Just hold that thought for a moment. You ever heard the name John Yancey? You're about to do some history with me. You ever heard the name John Yancey? I'll tell you a little story. World War II comes around. I don't have to explain to you World War II was horrific. And if you know anything about the Pacific portion of that, fighting the Japanese, it was extra horrific, turned up to 1,000. They were extra horrific. The environment was extra horrific. And one of the first major military campaigns, mainly a Marine Corps campaign, some Army too, with all due respect, was Guadalcanal. A bunch of Japanese soldiers there. We had to send some guys in and get them out. The Marines decided they were going to start some special forces group called the Marine Raiders. And one of the leaders of the Marine Raiders, his name was Evans Carlson. And they landed these Marine Raiders basically behind enemy lines and said, hey, go kill a bunch of Japanese soldiers. Evans Carlson on this campaign, it's a famous campaign now, very famous. I would highly recommend you look into this campaign on your own. I'm not going into it tonight. Evans Carlson and his group of raiders just slaughtered those Japanese guys. It was awesome. And he had a right-hand man, kind of a bodyguard who looked after him during this time. And that right-hand man's name was John Yancey. And he was basically a freaking lion. The guy was such a stud. He won the Navy Cross on Guadalcanal, was already at the end of World War II a hero, a legend. Well, John Yancey's not one to rest on his laurels, though. He decided to stay in the United States Marine Corps. He got a battlefield promotion to lieutenant during World War II because he was such a stud. They finally said, my goodness, just put some officer's bars on this guy. So now, brings us to the Korean War. You know anything about the Korean War? Highly recommend you dig into it. Most people don't know anything about it. It's not sexy like World War II. People forget. But during the Korean War, we sent, obviously I know there were a bunch of UN troops, but we sent about 20,000 US Marines and some Army personnel up into North Korea. We were fighting them off. We got into basically the middle of the two Koreas, and then Douglas MacArthur, I'm not going to go into that, decided, hey, let's just invade all the way up to China. So they sent these Marines up there. Well, Mao Zedong, head of China, obviously Chinese communist scumbag that he was, well, he was also a brilliant, brilliant military man, studied Sun Tzu, all these things. He saw all these Americans coming in. He hated America for backing his former opponents, the nationalists in China, and he decided he wanted to slaughter a bunch of Americans. So what he did was a bunch of things I won't get into, coaxing the Americans further north and further north and further north, all the while sending 300,000 Chinese troops down to slaughter these Marines and Army guys. They ended up at a place called Chosin Reservoir. You've probably heard of it before. Chosin Reservoir is about 20 degrees below zero when the winter hits. Marines got there about the time winter hit, and that was the place the Chinese decided they were going to spring their trap, surround the Marines, cut them off, and slaughter 20,000 Marines and Army. And so what happened was the Marines got there, got cut off, and now you got to dig in and fight. And so they would take these smaller Marine units and you would simply pick different hills. The hills all had numbers on them based on their elevation. They would dig in here, dig in there, dig in there. And on one hill was John Yancey's unit. He was in charge up there. He was a lieutenant at the time and already a legend, keep in mind. Already a war hero, a legend. And John Yancey stood there that night in the 20 below zero while his men dug in and he dug in, and he knew what was coming. They had flares set out, trip flares, so when someone would hit it, it would set it off. At one point, John Yancey gets the feeling that he's surrounded and the Chinese are coming. Keep in mind, this is the dead of night. There aren't street lights here. He calls down for his unit to send up some flares in the air so he can see, and they send up the flares, and he looks down over the hill, and they said it was like the ground was moving. There was just a sea of Chinese coming up the hill, bayonets attached to kill him and everyone in his unit. They began to slaughter Chinese soldiers by the thousand, and they kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And John Yancey didn't lay down, didn't cry, didn't back away, didn't hide in a hole. He spent the entire night encouraging his men, yelling at his men, shoot here, fill in there, this guy's dead, get him out of the way, put someone else in there, a lion, an absolute lion. By the time morning came around, 90% of John Yancey's unit, casualties. 90%. 9 out of every 10 men gone. There aren't many of them left. John Yancey has another hole in the line he needs to plug. He gathers up his men and says, let's charge right there. Make sure we secure that hole in the line. Keep in mind, this man has been wounded several times throughout the night, including at one point in time, an explosion lodging a piece of shrapnel up in the roof of his mouth. So he was choking on his own blood all night long. Too graphic? Tough. John Yancey went through it. You could sit there and listen to it. So while he's in this condition, gathers up his men, gets ready to charge, a Chinese soldier grabs a Thompson submachine gun and sprays John Yancey in the face. In the face. Goes right through his face, dislocates his jaw, shatters a bunch of teeth. By the grace of God, doesn't hit him in the brain or the spine, lodges back by his spine. But here he is with a bunch of bullet wounds in his face and his right eye hanging out. It blew his eye out of the socket. John Yancey, with his eye hanging on the side of his face, pulls out a .45 he took off of a Japanese soldier he'd killed and kills this Chinese soldier. He then looks down, grabs his right eye, and mashes it back into his skull. That's John Yancey. He would have got the Medal of Honor for it, except for all his commanding officers were dead, as well as most everyone else. They escorted him off the mountain, and he was eventually processed out of the Marine Corps. A hero, a legend. Now, that's the story of John Yancey. Now, Mr. Producer, if you wouldn't mind, would you put up the screen again and see the training your military is going through today? Do they look like they're training the next generation of John Yanceys, or do they look like they're training the next generation of Nancys who are simply going to lay down and let the communist Chinese storm through them like nothing? Keep in mind, by the end of that first night, Yancey and his unit were so low on ammo they were scrounging through the dead Chinese bodies trying to find anything that shoots. Hey, thanks so much for watching the first on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.